I should tell you first that the implant was never supposed to be important. It was a bad purchase, made at a bad time, from a company that turned out to be a very beautiful kind of lie. Neuro-Bridge Cortical Systems, incorporated out of a co-working space in a city that doesn't matter anymore, dissolved 18 months after I paid them 11,000 credits for a procedure my mother said I'd regret. The ceramic wafer they put in my cervical spine, C5, just below the cord's natural curve, bonded to the periosteum so that removing it would cost me roughly 40% of my fine motor function in the right hand, was their flagship product. The Neuro-Bridge Cortex-7, Series HX-4, designed to interface with proprietary software that no longer existed, supported by a company that no longer existed, manufactured in a facility that had since been converted into a warehouse for a fruit importer. The implant itself still worked. That was the frustrating part. It sat in my neck like a small, smooth tooth, drawing next to nothing in power from my body's bioelectric field, running on a sealed loop of firmware that would outlast me by several decades. It didn't do much of anything. The software it was designed to talk to had died with the company, but it sat there, patient and inert, a small ceramic rectangle stamped with the serial number HX-4-CORTEX-7 in characters small enough that you needed a micron scanner to read them. For 8 years, I had been explaining it to bureaucracies. Every planetary medical intake form, every security checkpoint at every transit hub, every time I flew on a government carrier and the boarding scanner caught it and flagged the record. Manufacturer unknown, the systems always returned. And then came the secondary screens, the pulled-aside waiting rooms, the officials who needed to make calls, the forms in triplicate, the affidavits from my own physician certifying that the device was inert, that it posed no security risk, that the company had simply ceased to exist, and I had simply been left holding the consequence. I had developed a folder for it. A physical folder, not a digital one, because digital documents got flagged as potentially altered, but physical folders with original letterhead and original signatures carried a weight that screens did not. The folder contained a letter from my physician explaining the device's inert status, with her license certification attached, a certified copy of Neuro-Bridge Cortical Systems dissolution filing from the commercial registry, a copy of my original surgical records, including the device's specification sheet, which was the only place in the known universe where the alphanumeric serial HX-4-CORTEX-7 appeared alongside a description of what it was supposed to be. A medical imaging scan showing the device's exact position and dimensions. An affidavit from a second physician, a specialist in medical device law, confirming that removal posed significant surgical risk and that the inert device was not subject to any active regulatory recall, because you cannot recall a product whose manufacturer no longer exists. I had updated the folder 3 times as the documents aged. I knew the routing number of the dissolution filing from memory. I knew the page number of the specification sheet that matched the serial number to the product line. I knew which documents the various checkpoint systems were looking for, and in what order to present them to move a secondary screen process along fastest. I had become, in the narrow and entirely unglamorous domain of explaining an orphaned spinal implant to security systems, something approaching an expert. 8 years of that had made me a particular kind of patient, the kind that knows exactly how long the process takes at each stage, who the right person to speak to is, what language makes them relax, and what language makes the situation worse. The kind of patient that is not patience as a virtue. It is patience as a skill, learned through repetition, ground smooth by 43 encounters with the same confusion in different rooms. So when the Vrethian boarding team came through the shuttle's lock at Tier Gate Sulin, I sat in my seat with my credentials on my lap and my hands folded, and I watched them the way you watch weather. They moved in threes. That was the first thing I noticed. Everything the Vreth did came in triples: 3 inspectors, 3 registry consoles on rolling mounts, 3 light strips along the ceiling of the boarding bay beyond the lock, each tuned to a slightly different frequency, so the combined effect was something close to daylight without being quite anything natural. The bay was enormous. The station's hull above it was transparent in a broad arc, and beyond the transparency was the day side of the planet below us, Sulin's surface catching the star's light and throwing it back. So the whole inspection space was full of that second-hand brightness, warm and diffuse, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's being documented. Which, in a sense, it was. The lead inspector, I later learned her designation was Archivist Second Velith, though at the time I only knew the rank stripe on her collar. 3 silver threads on dark blue carried the primary registry wand. It looked like an elongated stylus, perhaps 30 centimeters, with a reading head at the tip that emitted a soft amber pulse as it swept across each of us in turn. My delegation numbered 6, 2 senior attachés, 2 security escorts, 1 communications specialist, me. They scanned Counselor Davin first. He was the senior diplomatic lead, a man 20 years older than me who had been in the service long enough that getting scanned by alien bureaucrats barely registered on his face. The wand swept him. The registry console chimed. Davin, Petter, Terran Diplomatic Corps, Credential Level 4, Biological Assessment Complete, Cross-referenced, logged. The Archivist Second made a note. Moved on. The 2 security escorts scanned clean. The communications specialist scanned clean. The junior attaché next to me scanned clean. Then the wand reached me. It swept once. The console did not chime. The Archivist Second paused. That small pause was something. The Vreth are not a species that pauses. They have been cataloging the known galaxy, and I mean that with very little hyperbole, for something on the order of 6,000 standard years. Their registry is not a database in any sense a human engineer would recognize. It is a living constitutional document, a legal framework, a census, an insurance policy, and a religious text all compressed into one continuous record that they have been updating since before my species discovered that the sun did not orbit the earth. When a Vrethian Registry wand sweeps a person and the console chimes, that person exists in the only sense that matters to the Vreth. They are cataloged. They have standing. They can speak, contract, be heard. When the console does not chime, you are, in the only sense that matters to the Vreth, a question the registry has not yet answered. The Archivist Second swept the wand again. The console produced a sound I had not heard a registry console make before, a low, rising tone, almost a question in itself. Then text appeared on the screen in Vrethian script, and one of the junior inspectors leaned in and read it aloud in a flat, surprised voice, and the translation bead in my ear rendered it into something I could use. Biological entity, Terran, confirmed. Credential layer, complete, logged, anomaly detected, embedded non-biological structure, cervical region, classification, and here it paused because the registry was working, classification, pending. Manufacturer reference, no match. Serial designation returned, HX-4-CORTEX-7. Registry search, no record. Status, manufacturer unknown. I watched the Archivist Second's face go through something I can only describe as careful alarm. The Vreth have features that map roughly to human expressions if you know where to look. The ocular membranes pull inward when something surprises them, the way an iris contracts, and hers did that. Just once. Then she composed herself and looked at me with the particular flatness of someone who has encountered an administrative problem of unusual complexity. Attaché Solis, she said, and her translator rendered it with a neutrality that was itself a kind of statement. This device in your spine, you will explain its origin and purpose. It's a neural assist implant from a company called Neuro Bridge Cortical Systems, I said. They were a Terran manufacturer. They went bankrupt approximately 8 years ago. The device is inert. It no longer connects to any active software. I have documentation. I extended the credentials folder. She did not take it. The registry, she said, has no record of this manufacturer. I'm aware. An unregistered component embedded in a diplomatic delegate's biological structure is a matter of significant registry concern. I understand. I've explained this at 43 different checkpoints across 9 systems, I said, and I kept my voice mild because I had learned, a long time ago, that mild was the only register that worked in rooms like this. The documentation I carry addresses the device's inert status, its medical certification, and the circumstances of the manufacturer's dissolution. I'm happy to provide all of it. She looked at the console, then she looked at me. Then she said something to her junior inspector in a version of Vrethian that my translation bead caught only partially. Something about a registry null and what the procedural code for it was. I sat quietly. The light from the planet below us came through the transparent hull in long, warm sheets. Somewhere on the other side of the inspection bay, through the lock and down the corridor, the trade negotiation we had come 17 days of transit to conduct was waiting in a conference room that the Vreth had spent, by Councillor Davin's estimate, approximately 4 months decorating to human preferences. They had gotten the temperature almost right. Councillor Davin appeared at my elbow. He had the expression of a man who has run these missions long enough to recognize the shape of a complication before it has fully declared itself. "Is there a problem?" he asked, and I could hear him choosing the word problem the way you choose a probe, carefully, expecting resistance. The archivist second said, HX-4-CORTEX carries an unregistered non-biological structure. Until this anomaly is resolved, her legal personhood within compact jurisdiction is provisional. Davin looked at me. Provisional, I said, that's a new one. The registry, the archivist second continued, is the foundation of all legal standing within the Vrethian Compact. An entity whose biological or technological composition cannot be fully catalogued exists in an indeterminate state with respect to the registry. This is not a punitive designation. It is a categorical one. HX-4-CORTEX is not expelled. She is simply pending resolution. I watched Davin process this. He was a good diplomat. He had been a good diplomat for 30 years. But there are situations you simply cannot process quickly enough, and this was one of them. "What resolution does the registry require?" he asked. "The device must be registered or removed." "The device is bonded to her cervical spine," Davin said. "Removal would require surgery. Registration requires a manufacturer of record. The manufacturer no longer exists." "Then the registry cannot complete the record," the archivist second said, and she said it with a kind of genuine regret that I found, in an odd way, almost touching. She was not enjoying this. The Vreth do not enjoy administrative impasses. They are a species that regards incomplete records the way some people regard an open wound, not with malice, but with a deep, instinctive discomfort. An unresolved entry in the registry was, to her, a small but genuine suffering. I had been causing that suffering at checkpoints for 8 years. I had stopped feeling particularly bad about it. "I need a moment with my delegation," I said. The archivist second inclined her head and moved to confer with her juniors, which they did in that sub-vocalized Vrethian that registered in my translation bead as a low, unintelligible murmur, the conversational equivalent of a private channel, which I suspected was deliberate. I pulled Davin 2 steps back, near the viewport, where the planet's reflected light made a kind of private brightness around us. The light was genuinely beautiful, I noticed, the kind of thing you notice when you're in the middle of a complication, and some part of your mind steps briefly outside it. The planet below was cloud-covered in the northern quadrant, and the clouds caught the stars' light differently than the surface did, brighter, almost luminous, so the whole hemisphere had a texture to it that a flat surface wouldn't. I had been to 17 orbital stations in 11 years, and I still noticed when the view was good that it was good. Tell me the actual procedural situation, I said quietly. Davin rubbed the back of his neck. The compact's legal framework is architecturally rigid. An entity with indeterminate registry status cannot serve as a signatory on any compact-recognized instrument. That includes a trade agreement. Can they appoint someone else as signatory? You hold the authorization codes for the mission's biometric lock. The negotiating mandate is keyed to your biosignature. I had known this. The mandate keying had been a security decision made 3 months earlier in a room I had been in by people who had decided that biometric locked authorization codes were a good idea and had chosen me because my record was clean and my clearances were appropriate, and nobody, at any point, had thought to check whether my spine would constitute a registry anomaly. So if I can't sign, I said, the mandate can't be executed. Not in this session. Not without recalling to the mission authority and getting a rekeying, which is, Davin thought about it, 8 months minimum if the rekeying board convenes at standard schedule. And that assumes the Vreth hold the negotiating window open, which they are not obligated to do. 8 months. The trade agreement we were here to renegotiate touched 11 human colony systems and 4 joint-use transit corridors. The existing framework expired in 14 months. 8 months to rekey the mandate, plus the transit time back out here, plus the renegotiation itself. The math was not comfortable. I looked at the archivist second across the inspection bay. She was conferring with her juniors. The registry consoles glowed amber. Through the transparent hull, the planet below us was enormous and unhurried. All right, I said to Davin. Let me talk to her. What are you going to say? Something I've been thinking about for about 8 years, I said, and I walked back across the bay toward the archivist second, and the light from the planet below us followed me the whole way. The archivist second turned as I approached. Her junior inspectors flanked her in the way Vrethian officials always flanked, which is to say symmetrically, one on each side at a precise measured distance, as though their positions had been optimized for documentation purposes, which they probably had. They wore the same dark blue collared uniform as the archivist second, but without the silver thread at the collar, and their registry consoles were slightly smaller than hers, subunits. I assumed, feeding data to the primary console in her care. Archivist second, I said, I'd like to understand the registry's procedural framework for entities in indeterminate status. Not as an objection, I'm asking because I want to understand it correctly. She regarded me with the particular attentiveness the Vreth give to requests for procedural clarification. It is almost flattering how seriously they take it. You may ask, an entity in indeterminate registry status, can they be expelled from compact jurisdiction? The archivist second did not answer immediately. I watched her think, and the way she thought was visible. Her ocular membrane cycled slowly, which is what Vrethian cognition looks like from the outside when it is being careful. Expulsion, she said, is a registry action. It requires a completed record of arrival. So expulsion requires an entry. Yes. And my entry, my record of arrival, is complete. Biological entity confirmed, credentials logged, anomaly noted. The arrival record is complete, with the exception of the device classification. So I have an arrival record. A partial one. But it exists. She paused again. The anomaly note exists within the record. Then there is a record, I said, incomplete but extant. Now, can an entity be expelled if their record is incomplete? The archivist second looked at her junior inspector on the left. The junior inspector looked at the registry console. The console's amber light pulsed in the diffuse planetary daylight. Expulsion, the junior inspector said carefully. applies to entities whose complete records establish a legal basis for removal. And my record is incomplete, I said. Yes. So the registry cannot establish a complete legal basis for my expulsion. There was a silence in the inspection bay that had a particular quality. It was not hostile. It was the silence of a very well-organized system encountering a variable it had not indexed. I had spent 8 years in rooms like this. I had spent 8 years in that silence. I knew its texture the way you know the texture of a recurring weather pattern, the shape of clouds before rain, the drop in pressure, the particular stillness before things resolve. The difference between those 8 years and this moment was simple. In those 8 years, the silence had been mine to sit in, waiting for someone else to decide how to end it. In this moment, I was the one who knew how to end it, and I was not in a hurry. Additionally, I said, the negotiating mandate for this mission is biometrically locked to my biosignature. The authorization codes are keyed to my living biological structure, which the registry has confirmed as Terran in origin and credential complete. The device anomaly concerns a non-biological embedded component. My biology is not in question. The anomaly touches your biological record, the archivist second said. Under Registry Protocol 742, an incomplete biological record attaches to the record of an individual whose biological identity is confirmed, I said. You confirmed it. The registry confirmed it. My biological identity has an entry. The anomaly is a note within that entry, not a replacement for it. The individual me is confirmed. The component within the individual is pending. Those are two different things. The archivist second looked at her junior inspectors. Both of them looked at the console. The console pulsed amber, patient as a heartbeat. I should explain something about the Vreth and their registry, because if you have not dealt with them before, you might think what I was doing was clever in some adversarial way, some human slipperiness, some lateral thinking trick of the kind that humans sometimes romanticize in ourselves. It wasn't that, or it wasn't only that. The Vreth built their registry to be internally consistent above all other things. They had spent 6,000 years making it so. The same rigidity that made the registry so powerful, the same completeness that gave it its legal weight across 47 member species, also made it subject to its own architecture in ways that could not be overridden by preference or convenience. The archivist second could not simply decide to expel me, or to exclude me, or to void my standing, because the registry's own structure prevented it. Not because I was clever, because the system they had built with such care was responding to its own rules. The HX-4-CORTEX-7 was, in the registry's terms, an unresolvable entity, not a dangerous one, not a fraudulent one, an unresolvable one. And an unresolvable entity within a system built on resolution creates a specific kind of legal quiet. I was to the registry simultaneously the most documented human in the bay, confirmed biology, confirmed credentials, confirmed arrival, and the only human in the bay with an open anomaly. The anomaly could not be closed. The manufacturer was gone. No record existed. No record could be created without a manufacturer to create it. And the registry's own architecture prevented the expulsion of an entity whose record, however incomplete, was extant. I was not outside the system. I was inside it, in a space the system had not anticipated. The archivist second spent a long time looking at her console. The light from the planet below drifted across the bay's floor as the station completed a degree or two of its orbital arc. One of her junior inspectors said something very quietly in Vrethian, and my translation bead caught only a fragment, something about a precedent query, about searching the registry for similar cases. Has the registry encountered this situation before? I asked. Not in this precise configuration, the junior inspector admitted, and then looked alarmed that he had admitted it, and then looked at the archivist second, who had the expression of someone composing a message they were not looking forward to sending. "I need to consult with the registry arbiter," she said. "Of course," I said. "Take the time you need, I'll wait." I went back to Davin. He was standing by the viewport with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the planet below us with the expression of a man who has decided that watching the planet is more productive than watching an administrative crisis unfold. Davin had a gift for that, for finding, in the middle of complications, some neutral point of focus that let him think without appearing to. I had seen him do it in 8 different systems, in rooms considerably more fraught than this one. "Well," he said without turning, "they're consulting." "Consulting who?" "Their arbiter, which is, as I understand it, the senior interpretive authority within their registry legal structure. The person you call when the system has encountered something it doesn't have a case for." Davin turned from the viewport. "And that's good for us or bad for us?" "It's slow for us," I said, "but it's not bad. If the arbiter says the registry protocol prevents expulsion without a complete record, then I stay. And if I stay, the mandate can be executed and the negotiation proceeds. And if the arbiter says something else, then we have a different problem. But I've been reading their published procedural documents for about 3 hours in the transit here, and I don't think the arbiter is going to say something else." Davin looked at me. He had known me for 6 years. He knew, I think, that I was not a person who spent 3 hours reading procedural documents idly. "You knew this was going to happen," he said. "I knew it might happen. I've been scanned at 43 checkpoints, Petter. You learn to think ahead of the wand." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the planet turned below us, slow and indifferent. "When did you have time to read their procedural documents?" he said. "Third watch during transit. It was either that or play another round of tiles with Yessa, and she cheats." He almost smiled. "She does cheat." "I've known this thing was in my neck for 8 years, I said. "I've been explaining it to systems that couldn't categorize it for 8 years. I figured eventually I'd end up somewhere where that inability to categorize it actually mattered in a direction that was useful to me instead of just frustrating." Davin looked at me for a long moment. "That's either extremely clever or extremely lucky." "It's mostly just extremely tired," I said, and I meant it. "I have been so tired of carrying this paperwork for so long." We waited. The inspection bay was quiet. The Vrethian junior inspectors stood at their consoles with the focused patience of people who regard waiting as itself a form of cataloging. The ambient light shifted fractionally as the station moved. Someone in the delegation, I think it was the communications specialist, Aura, who had the habit of fidgeting that she had never quite managed to train out of herself, shifted her weight and then went still again. The consultation took 40 minutes. I know because I counted them in the way I have always counted waiting time, not obsessively, but with a kind of background awareness, the way you keep track of weather. The archivist second stood at her console with her back to us for most of it, speaking in sub-vocalized Vrethian that my translation bead could not catch from this distance. Occasionally she turned pages, or the Vrethian equivalent, scrolling through what I assumed were precedent records on a secondary screen. I thought about the implant. I thought about the procedure room, 8 years ago, the particular quality of the light in that place, the cool air, the weight of a decision I had been told was routine, and which had not turned out to be routine in any of the ways I had expected. I had wanted the cortical assist for legitimate reasons. The technology, at the time, had seemed promising, a passive enhancement to working memory and signal processing, the kind of thing that seemed obvious for someone in my field. My work at that point was concentrated in language and legal framework analysis, and I had read the Neuro-Bridge prospectus 3 times and believed it was the kind of instrument that would give me a margin in precision work, a half-second's advantage in pattern recognition, the sort of subtle edge that nobody would be able to point to directly, but that accumulated across years into something real. I had thought about it for 6 months before I committed. I had done my research, as much research as one can do on a technology that is 18 months old, sold by a company with 2 years of operating history and a chief executive who gave very good interviews. The company had seemed legitimate, the surgeon had seemed careful, the procedure had gone well technically. The firmware had loaded. The device had done what it was supposed to do for approximately 16 months before Bridge Cortical Systems had quietly stopped returning calls, closed their offices, and dissolved into the archive of failed ventures that any technology sector produces in quantity. And I had been left with a small ceramic rectangle in my neck, and a serial number that no system in the known galaxy could match to a living manufacturer. I had grieved it, in the way you grieve something that is not a death but has some of death's permanence, the grief of a thing that cannot be undone, that you carry forward as simply part of the weight. There had been a period in the first year when I had consulted 3 different medical device lawyers about options. The news from each of them had been consistent. Dissolution without assets meant no recovery. The surgical risk of removal was real and not small. Living with the device was the most medically sound option, and the most economically sound, and the most practically achievable. I had filed the legal consultations in the folder alongside everything else, and I had eventually stopped thinking about removal and started thinking about management. I had also, in time, become fluent in it. I knew which documents to carry. I knew how to preempt the secondary screens. I knew the precise language that made security officials relax and the precise language that made them escalate, and I had learned to use the first and avoid the second with something close to reflex. 8 years of carrying something that no system can categorize teaches you, among other things, how systems work. Not in the way an engineer knows how a system works from the inside, from the design, from the outside, from the experience of pressing against one repeatedly and learning, through that pressure, where it bends and where it holds. I knew where the Vrethian Registry held, and I knew now where it bent. The archivist second turned from her console. "The registry arbiter has reviewed the procedural question," she said, and her voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering a ruling they have made their peace with. "The arbiter confirms that under Registry Protocol 742, subsection 9, an entity whose arrival record is extant, even if incomplete, cannot be subject to a registry expulsion action without the completion of that record. The anomaly note within your record does not void the record's existence. Your arrival record exists." I nodded. "Furthermore," she said, and there was something in that word that told me she was not finished making peace with this. "The arbiter notes that the biometric lock on the mission authorization mandate is itself a compact recognized security instrument, and that the biological subject of the biometric lock, your confirmed biological identity, is registry confirmed. The instrument therefore attaches to a confirmed entity, and the instrument's validity is not affected by the embedded anomaly." I nodded again. "Attaché Solis," the archivist second said, "you may proceed to the negotiating chamber. Your status within this session is," she paused, and I thought she was choosing the word very carefully, "logged as attending delegate, anomaly pending, active participant." "Active participant," I said, "that'll do." "The anomaly record will remain open indefinitely," she said, "unless the manufacturer of record is located." "I understand. I've had an open anomaly record for 8 years. I'm used to it." She looked at me, and I thought, though the ocular membranes of the Vreth are not easy to read, that there was something in her expression that was not quite sympathy and not quite admiration, but was something in the neighborhood of both. "The registry finds this situation irregular," she said. "The manufacturer found the whole situation irregular," I said. "I think that's why they went bankrupt." She did not have an answer for that. The Vreth rarely do, when you give them something that is both technically accurate and entirely useless from a cataloging perspective. Davin appeared at my shoulder. We're cleared. Cleared. Good, he turned toward the locked corridor. Then let's not make them wait any longer. We moved through the lock in order: security first, then communications, then the attachés, then Davin. I was last by habit, because I always take a moment after a checkpoint before I walk through. Not from anxiety, just from the particular satisfaction of having been on the wrong side of a scanner for long enough that walking through one cleanly, or in this case, having been held and then released, still registers as something worth feeling. The inspection bay was bright behind me as I walked through. The planet's reflected light came through the transparent hull in long, steady sheets. The negotiating chamber was at the end of a corridor that the Vreth had designed with something like human aesthetic sensibility. The walls were a warm stone color rather than their usual registry blue, and the lighting was fuller, less clinical. Someone had placed a water fixture along one wall, a small recirculating stream over pale river stones, because apparently their briefing on human preferences had included a section on ambient sound. I thought it was a very touching effort, and I thought it was also slightly wrong, in the way that representations of another culture's preferences are always slightly wrong, accurate to the research, off in the texture. We sat. The Vreth delegation entered, 5 of them, led by a trade arbiter whose rank stripe was gold rather than silver, which in Vrethian protocol meant she held full signatory authority. They sat across the table from us. The table itself was Vrethian, long and pale, some kind of composite material that caught the overhead lighting and scattered it softly. The trade arbiter looked at me, not at Davin, who was the senior lead, at me. "Attaché Solis," she said. "Trade arbiter," I said. "The registry has transmitted the anomaly report to my session record. I have read it." She paused. "This device in your spine, you have carried it for 8 years. 8 years and 4 months. And in that time, how many registry-adjacent systems have you encountered that could not categorize it? 43 checkpoints prior to today, 44 now." The trade arbiter considered this. The Vreth, when they are genuinely considering something, go very still in a way that is not uncomfortable to be in the presence of. It is the stillness of deep attention, not of hostility. "And in each of those 43 encounters," she said, "the system produced an anomaly record and you provided documentation." "Yes." "You became, over those encounters, expert in navigating the anomaly." "You could say that." She nodded once. "We say in the registry that an uncatalogued thing is a problem without a record. We also say, less formally, that a problem without a record is a problem that teaches you something the record has not yet learned to ask." She settled back in her chair, which was adjusted to Vrethian proportions but held her comfortably. "I would like to know, before we begin the formal session, whether the Terran Diplomatic Corps chose you for this mission knowing about the device." I looked at Davin. Davin looked at the table, which told me he was leaving the answer to me. "They chose me," I said, "for my record and my clearances. The device is on my medical file. Anyone who read the full file knew about it." "Did they anticipate the registry anomaly?" "I don't think they thought about it specifically," I said. "I did. I read your procedural documents during transit." The trade arbiter's ocular membrane cycled. I was beginning to learn to read that reflex. It was not surprise, exactly. It was the expression of a system encountering new information and integrating it. "You prepared for this encounter," she said. "I prepare for it everywhere I go. I've had 8 years of practice." She was quiet for a moment. Around us, the Vrethian junior delegates and the human attachés waited in the particular silence of a room that understands something important has just been said, but is not sure yet what it changes. "Attaché Solis," the trade arbiter said, "I would like to make an observation, and I ask that you take it in the spirit in which it is intended." "Go ahead." The Vrethian Registry has catalogued 47 species, 912 distinct technological lineages, and over 40,000 individual manufacturer designations. It has done so over a period of 6,000 years, and in that time it has encountered, by the arbiter's count, which was provided to me this morning, 17,422 anomalies, entities or objects that could not be fully classified at first encounter. Most of those anomalies were resolved within days. The registry located the manufacturer, identified the technology, completed the record. She paused. 61 of them remain open. In 6,000 years, 61 things the registry has encountered that could not, in any amount of time, be fully resolved. I waited. As of today, she said, that number is 62. There was a silence, then I said, I'm sorry to add to the list. Do not be. The 61 open anomalies are, in the registry's experience, some of the most instructive records it holds. They are the records that taught the registry where its edges are, where its architecture has limits, where the universe produces things that a 6,000-year system has not yet learned to ask about. She looked at the small device that could not be seen but that she clearly understood to be in my spine. A failed human company. A device that drew power from your body for 8 years, inert, waiting, carrying a serial number that connects to nothing. And yet here you sit at this table because the registry's own rules prevented your exclusion. She paused. There is something in that which the registry finds informative. The bankruptcy was not planned, I said. I understand. And she almost smiled. The Vreth do not smile the way humans do, but there is a relaxation of the formal musculature around the jaw that functions similarly. I am not crediting the company with wisdom. I am crediting the situation. Your species produces technologies that fail. The companies dissolve. The records go dark. But the technology remains in your bodies, in your infrastructure, in your world, doing whatever it still can. And then your people move through the universe carrying those remnants, and the remnants generate anomalies, and the anomalies generate situations that nobody planned for, including this one. Davin had been listening to this with the quality of attention he gave to things that he understood were not small. Trade arbiter, he said carefully, I appreciate the philosophical dimension of this. I want to make sure, though, we are still proceeding with the session. We are proceeding, she said. Attaché Solis' status is confirmed. Active participant. She opened the session folder on the table's embedded surface. I would like to note, for the registry's record, which will be open and unresolvable for as long as either of us lives, that the Vrethian Compact's first session with a delegate carrying an open anomaly in their spine was a trade renegotiation covering 11 human colony systems and 4 joint transit corridors. That seems appropriate. Why appropriate? Davin asked. Because transit corridors, she said, are in their nature paths between things that are known and things that are not yet catalogued. It is where the registry's edges are most visible. She looked at me again. Shall we begin? Please, I said. The session lasted 9 hours. I will not account for all of it here, because the substance of a trade renegotiation is not the substance of what I want to tell you about that day. I will say that it went well, better than Davin had anticipated, and he had been in this work for 30 years and had calibrated expectations accordingly. The Vreth are not easy negotiating partners. They are precise, they are patient, and they have a forensic understanding of their own interests that makes careless concessions impossible and well-prepared ones feasible. But they are also, underneath the registry and the procedural architecture, a species that respects preparation. They respect the thoroughness of a record. They respect the care taken to understand a system before you engage with it. And I had spent 3 hours reading their procedural documents on the transit in. I had spent days 4 and 5 reviewing the technical annexes to the current framework agreement, which most of the human delegation had skimmed. Day 6, I had read the Vrethian Trade Arbiter Precedent Summaries, a dry document, full of registry notation conventions I had to cross-reference against the glossary, but clear enough once you understood the architecture. Day 7, I had read the navigational survey data that the pre-session briefings had flagged as potentially contentious. Day 8 through 10, I had done nothing but prepare questions and scenarios, because I have found, in 11 years of diplomatic work, that the quality of the questions you've prepared before a session determines, more than anything else, the quality of the outcomes you can reach during it. I had also spent 8 years learning how systems work from the outside. At hour 3, we worked through the tariff provisions, complex, heavily annotated, the kind of negotiation that requires both sides to have done arithmetic in advance and to be honest about it. The Vreth did not hide their numbers. That was something you learned quickly about them. The registry made concealment functionally impossible because any figure you put in a compact recognized document became a registry entry, and registry entries were searchable. They had no appetite for positions they could not later defend by their own record. I found that, in a strange way, restful. Negotiating with species that can lie is a particular kind of exhausting. Negotiating with species that won't because their entire legal framework depends on the integrity of their documentation is something else. At hour 7, we reached the transit corridor provisions, the most contested section of the agreement, the one that the preliminary briefings had flagged as most likely to fracture the session. The Vreth wanted a narrower usage window for Corridor 4, which ran through a region they were reclassifying in their registry as a navigational sensitivity zone. The human colony systems that depended on Corridor 4 needed the existing window to maintain supply schedules. Narrowing it by the margin the Vreth were proposing would require those systems to reorganize their shipping cadence in ways that carried real cost. Not catastrophic cost, but real and cumulative, and borne almost entirely by people who were already working on margins that didn't leave room for reorganization. The trade arbiter laid out the Vrethian position with precision. I had been expecting it, roughly, from the pre-session documents. I let her finish, and then I said, "May I suggest a framework?" She indicated that I might. The registry's concern with Corridor 4 is the navigational sensitivity reclassification, I said. That reclassification is based on survey data from a probe pass, according to your published records, conducted 11 years ago. Correct. Our transit authority conducted an independent survey of Corridor 4 7 years ago, using updated instrumentation. The data is in the mission documentation. I'd like to enter it into the record. There was a pause while the junior delegates on both sides of the table checked their documents. The Vrethian junior delegate confirmed the document was in the shared session file. The trade arbiter reviewed it. "This data," she said, after several minutes, "predates our current reclassification by 4 years. Yes, but it uses a generation of instrumentation that was more sensitive than the probe pass it supersedes, and it finds the navigational sensitivity factors the registry is concerned about at significantly lower intensity than the 11-year-old survey. The reclassification may be based on data that was accurate for its time and instrumentation, and is no longer the best available picture." The trade arbiter was quiet for a long moment. Around the table, the delegations waited. "The registry," she said finally, "updates its records when better data is available." "I know," I said. "That's why I entered it." Another pause. The trade arbiter conferred with her junior delegate in sub-vocalized Vrethian. My translation bead caught a fragment, something about survey data protocols, and whether independent survey results from non-compact entities qualified for registry entry. "Independent survey results from non-compact entities," I said, "are eligible for registry entry under Protocol 31, subsection 4, if accompanied by instrumentation certification and the certifying entities standing in the registry." The trade arbiter looked at me. You have read Protocol 31. I have read a lot of your protocols, I said. I had 17 days of transit and I was curious. Davin, to his credit, did not make any expression that could have been recorded as inappropriate. The Vrethian delegation conferred. It took some time. The water fixture on the wall moved its small current of water over its pale stones, and the sound of it was almost right, almost the sound of something natural, without quite the randomness that real water carries. But it was a genuine effort, and I found in that 9th hour of a long session that genuine efforts matter. The trade arbiter looked up. The registry will review the survey data under Protocol 31. Pending that review, which will be conducted according to standard registry timeline, the Corridor 4 window reverts to its existing parameters. For how long? Davin asked. Until the review is complete. The registry's standard timeline for a survey data review of this classification is, she checked, 14 to 20 months. The existing trade framework expired in 14 months. Davin looked at me. I gave him a very small nod. We can work with that, he said. After the session, when the formal documentation had been exchanged, and the Vrethian junior delegates had begun the process of entering the session record into the registry, a process I was told would take approximately 3 days, given the anomaly notation that needed to be correctly formatted and cross-referenced. The trade arbiter stopped me in the corridor outside the negotiating chamber. The corridor was lit by that same diffused daylight from the station's transparency, warm and indirect. The planet below was moving toward the station's shadow now, the sunlit portion contracting as we drifted in our orbital arc, and the light in the corridor was golden in the way late afternoon is golden, that last hour when everything is legible and nothing is harsh. Attaché Solis, she said. I turned. The anomaly record, she said, HX-4-CORTEX-7, it will remain in the registry indefinitely, as I said. I know. Other compact checkpoints will encounter it. Other inspectors will need to manage the procedural question. I know that too. I would like to enter a notation in the record, she said. A note from this session to follow the record wherever it appears, with your permission. I considered this. What notation? That the entity to whom this anomaly attaches is familiar with its procedural implications, that she has navigated them at 44 checkpoints, that she is. The trade arbiter searched for the word, and I had the impression she was searching carefully, competent to manage the anomaly in context. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about 8 years of secondary screens and affidavit folders, and the particular patience you develop when a system cannot categorize you and you have learned to live inside that uncategorizability. I thought about the procedure room and the light in it, and the cost of 11,000 credits and 16 months of a technology working as advertised, and the long administrative tale of a company's failure that I had been carrying in my neck ever since. You can enter the notation, I said, but I want it accurate. What would accurate say? That the entity to whom this anomaly attaches has been managing its procedural implications for 8 years, that she does not find the anomaly convenient, that she would prefer a categorized spine, but that in 44 encounters with systems that could not classify her implant, she has not once allowed the anomaly to prevent legitimate work from being done. The trade arbiter looked at me for a long moment. That is not the language of a registry notation. No, but it is accurate. Yes. She considered. I will enter a version of it that the registry can hold. The substance will be preserved. She paused. The registry does not often encounter entities that know its rules better than the inspector at the checkpoint. The registry hasn't been living inside an anomaly for 8 years, I said. She inclined her head, a very small gesture, but in Vrethian protocol I had learned. A head inclination from a trade arbiter at the senior rank was not a small thing. It was the gesture reserved for acknowledgement of something the registry had learned. I walked back toward the docking lock where the shuttle waited, and Davin fell into step beside me. "We got what we came for," he said. "We got what we came for." The Corridor 4 window, the survey review timeline, the recognition of independent data under Protocol 31. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you plan the survey data argument in advance too?" "I read the pre-session documents on day 3 of transit," I said. "The reclassification was in there. I pulled the independent survey from the mission archive on day 5. And the Protocol 31 qualification. Day 8. He was quiet again. We walked through the corridor's golden light, past the pale Vrethian walls that had been warmed to something approximating human aesthetic preference. "Marin," he said, and he almost never used my given name in professional context. "Did the service put you on this mission knowing what you'd do with it?" "I think the service put me on this mission because my clearances were appropriate and my record was clean, and the biometric clock requirement fit the security parameters," I said. "I don't think anyone planned farther than that." "But you planned farther than that." "I planned as far as I always plan," I said, "which is farther than the checkpoint." He thought about that, the anomaly in your spine. "You've been carrying a tool you didn't know was a tool for 8 years. "It's not a tool," I said. "It's a piece of failed technology from a bankrupt company. It does nothing. It sits in my neck and occasionally makes inspectors uncomfortable." "It made the registry classify you as simultaneously present and unclassifiable," Davin said, "in a system where classification is personhood." That was the registry's architecture, not the device. But the device is what the architecture couldn't resolve. I didn't answer that. We had reached the lock. The shuttle beyond it was warm, the interior lights on standby orange, the seats still set to our preferred configurations from the transit in. I stopped at the lock threshold. The inspection bay was off to the right. I could see the edge of it through a junction corridor, still lit with that ambient planetary daylight, the registry consoles glowing amber in the quiet. The archivist second and her junior inspectors were gone. The bay was empty except for the light. I thought about the thing sitting in my neck. Not for the first time and not in a new way. I had thought about it more often than I could count, in more registers than I could catalog. Frustration, mostly. Inconvenience. The specific grief of a decision that had seemed sound at the time and had turned out to be permanent in ways I had not anticipated. The long education of living with something that no system could place. There was also something else, though. Something I had not found language for until today, or had not needed language for, because the thing itself had been only a burden and had not yet shown me any other face. Today it had shown me another face. Not a good one, exactly. I was not going to romanticize a piece of orphan technology into something it was not. The device was still a failed product from a failed company, still inert, still doing nothing in my neck but sitting there and confounding scanners. That had not changed. What had changed was that I had spent 9 hours at a negotiating table that I might not have been allowed to approach, not because of any quality I possessed in a general sense, but because of the specific and entirely accidental fact that my spine contained something the Vrethian Registry could not close a record on. The accidental fact had created the procedural space. The procedural space had kept me at the table. And being at the table had let me use what I had actually prepared, the survey data, the protocols, the careful 11 days of reading, to reach an outcome that would hold for 14 colony systems and 4 transit corridors for the foreseeable future. The device had not done that. I had done that. But the device had been the condition for the doing, and that was a strange thing to carry alongside the other thing I had always carried about it. I thought about the trade arbiter's phrase, "A problem without a record is a problem that teaches you something the record has not yet learned to ask. I had been taught a great deal in 8 years by the problem of my own unresolvable spine. But also now this, the 44th checkpoint, the one where the anomaly had mattered in a direction that was useful, where the thing that no registry could resolve had sat quietly in the architecture of an alien legal system and found the space that system's own rules created for it and occupied it and held. Neuro-bridge cortical systems had been a lie in the end, or not a lie, a failure. An honest attempt that had not survived contact with the economics of a competitive market and the particular difficulty of making new technologies pay before they are ready. The surgeon had been careful. The device had worked. The company had not. And I had been left carrying HX-4-CORTEX-7 in my neck, through 44 checkpoints, across 9 systems, into a negotiating chamber on an orbital station above a planet whose name, in the Vrethian Registry, now appeared in a record that noted my anomaly alongside my confirmed credentials, my biometric authorization codes, and the notation that the entity to whom this anomaly attached was competent to manage it in context. I stepped through the lock. "Let's go home," I said. The shuttle's engines cycled as I belted in. Through the viewport, Tiergate Sulen was already beginning to move, or we were beginning to move, which is always the same thing from inside. The station grew smaller in the frame of the port window, and as it shrank it resolved from a complex structure into a simpler shape, a long pale cylinder against the star field, catching the star's light on its transparency arc in a single bright line, like a seam. The planet below it caught the star's light differently at this angle, the terminator line sharp between the sunlit surface and the shadow, the lit portion vast and luminous, and the dark portion simply absent, a held space where the light had not yet arrived or had already passed. I looked at the mission documentation on the tablet in my lap. 11 colony systems, 4 transit corridors, a review timeline that would resolve itself before the existing framework expired, 14 months and we had found the room within them. Work done. In the registry somewhere, a record glowed amber, incomplete, permanent, annotated with the notation that a trade arbiter had composed in language the system could hold. An open anomaly, a thing that could not be resolved, noted, catalogued, and carried forward. I knew how that felt. I had known how that felt for 8 years. I leaned back in the seat as the shuttle accelerated away from the station, and the planet turned below us, and the star's light came through the viewport clean and direct and without apology, and I let myself feel, just for a moment, the particular quiet of a checkpoint cleared. The device in my neck was still there. It would always be there. It still didn't do anything. But it had been in the room, and the room had remembered it, and that, in the end, had been enough.